All right, welcome all. One of the least favorite upgrades from Zoom for those of us that are running Zoom completely on worship completely on Zoom. I get it, but don't necessarily like it. So anyway, welcome all to our monthly Zoom gathering where we just talk about actually using Zoom on some of their things. I do record this. I'll post it on my YouTube channel and post it into our Zoom faith group. Um just ask that when you ask questions or you are going to say anything, just introduce yourself very quickly, your name, pronouns, where you are, just so we can get a sense of who's in the room when we respond to each other. And this is pretty small group. We're usually on one screen these days, so we can kind of interact as you need. Obviously stay on mute when you're not talking and all of that. And then I record. I don't edit, so if you say something that you don't want in there, it's going on the internet. So there you go. Again, if there's anything really bad, so don't talk bad about colleagues or churches or anything. All right. Well, welcome. So I wanted to talk about today how folks are going with this hybrid piece that as folks are kind of moving into space and kind of however you're describing what you're doing. And I'll start by sharing a little about what we're doing, and then would love to hear how what's happening for you all, and we can offer some feedback. I won't put Henry on the spot, but Henry has a lot of technical background that we will fully take advantage of, and I assume because you're here, Henry, you are willing to do that. So really, if you have questions, put stuff in the chat as well. And so, as some of First Press Palo Alto, where we've kind of been in this ongoing process, and I feel like we were way ahead of the curve early on when we said we weren't going to meet until the end of the year, and everybody freaked out because they're like, how could you, oh no. And then 6 months later we're still not meeting in person. But we're speeding up. California, Santa Clara County, where I am, is the numbers are super low. California in about a week will probably, as we all expect, is going to fully open up and all protocols are gone. We are waiting for our county to tell us how strict they will be. They have traditionally been a little more strict, which we're hoping they will continue to do again, so we don't have to make hard choices. But so the way we're framing it is on August 15th, we are adding an in-person option to our ongoing worship experience. So we are not talking about it as a reopening. We're not talking about it as a launch. We are really we are fully embracing the idea of hybrid. And the way that our community has determined what hybrid is going to be, no shock, is that we're not centering either the in-person or the remote space, but we're trying to create a new space where neither part is centered, overly centered. So you'll feel like no matter which you choose, you're in a worship experience, and it will be different for both, but we're trying to create a different way of being. So that's kind of where we are, and we are doing a setup, and we're testing it out today, which we had this idea. And we think it's super simple, which it makes me worried. So now we run our entire service on Zoom. We don't stream out. So that, just keeping in context that that's what we do. We have simply logged in 4 devices, and those are our 4 cameras plus our main camera. And so we have Pulpit Cam 1, Lectern Cam 2, both iPads, and then 2 chancel cams that they're all logged in under different accounts. And our Zoom host will then just spot or move things around depending on which camera they need to see. So we're not doing video switchers. We're not doing any of that. We have we're going to buy one solid PTZ for our main camera that's going to be used for concerts and weddings and worship as well. And then we have these 4 just separately logged in boxes that will appear for our Zoom person. We've worked out all the sound, so none of them will log in for sound. They will all just be video. We thought of this idea in our worship team, and we're kind of like, this seems really simple. This can't work. So we've tested it out a little bit, and we're going to do a full run this afternoon to kind of see if it actually does work. And so that's what we're doing. Very little. We borrowed all the iPads before we decide we're going to buy them. We've very little expense. Even though this is a church that could afford to do it, we have not had to do it. So that we're going to run it a few times before we decide we're going to make a bigger investment in what we're doing. So that's kind of what we're doing. Again, I am preaching from here twice a month. So we are working out our leadership schedule now. And every slot now has remote or in person next to it. So we're setting up our greeters again. We'll have online greeters and in person greeters. Our liturgists, you have to be remote or in person. It'll all key off of the preacher. So if I'm remote, the liturgist has to be in person. If I'm in person, the liturgist will be remote. That kind of vibe is what we're going for. Again, trying to create this non-centered space. If any of you have been in any of the events that I've been leading lately in presbyteries, mostly presbyteries at this point, been doing a lot about 5 disruptions, and I'll share that link out with you in a little bit, just about things that are, if you really want to do this hybrid thing, what we're doing to really disrupt both settings to create something new. And folks, at the beginning of the process, were super excited about it and are now starting to be like, oh, wait a minute. But we're pushing through. I'm like, I can honestly tell people now, I tried to talk you out of this. So we're going to do it now, right? So that's where we are. It's good spirited, but it's like folks are like, oh, this is a lot more work than we thought it would be. So that's kind of where we are. We are going to hire staff, and we are a congregation that fortunately can hire some staff. So we're now contemplating what has to be remote and what has to be in person, and can we combine positions, or that kind of thing. So that's kind of where we are now, is starting. It's a little late in the game to be doing it, but we're wanting to make sure we have the right things staffed out to the right places. So anyway, so that's what we're doing at First Presbyterian Church here in Palo Alto. And it is, for me, it's exciting and it's daunting. And I will also say that for you pastor types, church leaders out there, if you're also feeling like super worn down, you're seeing a lot of articles right now about pastors really struggling coming out of what we're describing as trauma and disaster, and now having to shift back into normal. So there was a great article by Religion News Service last month by Robert Smida about this that I think it would be a good read. It's on my Facebook page right now. Just so, again, I find myself trying to switch back into processing and doing everything that I would like to do, and then get kind of hit with the wall of, oh, I'm actually tired. And this has been rough. So if you're feeling that, you're not alone. All right. There you go. Thoughts, comments, and then I would love for people to share. Just take 2, 3, 4 minutes and share what you're doing. How are you moving into this space? And I think it's helpful to describe technology as well as cultural shift, because everybody that says hybrid, it's going to look different for every person. So just as you're thinking about what does hybrid look for you, and then technical questions, best practices, or if you have what should I do? You can either put it in the chat or share it, and some of us may be able to answer. So I'm just going to let folks go. And is there anybody that would like to go first? How's it going? Go for it, Margaret. Go ahead and unmute yourself. And
okay, I'm Margaret. I live just outside of Montreal, Quebec in Canada. I'm on the board of the Lakeshore Unitarian Universalist congregation. I'm a retired social worker. Why am I the techie of the congregation? God only knows. I have no idea what we're doing. We have not gone back to anything in the building yet. We have been on Zoom since March 2020. We just moved into the orange zone today, which means that we have a little more flexibility. We're thinking about September. And I've been attending all of these things, and they talk about PTZ cameras and this and that. And I have no idea what to recommend to the board in terms of a budget for expenses tomorrow night. And so any ideas are welcome. We know we need a new laptop. We're going to buy a new laptop. We want to buy a camera. Our thought is to have the services in the hall rather than in the sanctuary, because we can have the chairs move around. We have we rent our buildings, so we don't own our buildings. So in the church, in the hall, we can, have a limited, we're a small congregation, like 35 people maximum. We've had way more people on Zoom than we ever had in live services, so.
Great. Thank you, Margaret. And thinking about our colleagues in Canada right now, and those of you that are involved in faith communities with everything that's going on with discovering of the children and Indigenous work. And for those Presbyterians, the Presbyterian Church in Canada is in their General Assembly right now. I know that's exciting for about 4 of us here, but there you go. So how would you, so Margaret, you are not alone. This is a question I get all the time. It's a very broad kind of, but legitimate question, is like, where do we even start? Right? I mean, that's just a great question. That PTZ thing, all of us throw that around. It's pan, tilt, zoom. It's just a fancy word for a fancy, expensive camera. But I'm gonna ask Henry, because Henry, if you could introduce yourself real quick, tell us a little bit about what your background, and then how would you answer that to a congregation that's just like small, maybe has resources or not, but just like, how do we even begin thinking about this next? What would you say, Henry? And then Brenda, we'll go to you.
Thanks, Bruce. Henry Sue, I am in Cary, North Carolina, and my background professionally has been more in telecommunications and video conferencing. So have a lot of experience using Zoom with mostly hybrid classrooms, but I also volunteer at my church, and we've actually gone, ironically, last Sunday, yesterday, we went with a full hybrid service. We're not using Zoom for our worship services, but we actually went maskless for the first time last Sunday. So, very exciting and also very scary at the same time. But that's a different subject. So your question, Bruce, and I think what a lot of people are asking is, what kind of equipment do I need? I think the first thing that I would recommend for anyone, whether it be a service, whether it be a class, whatever, is to figure out what you want to accomplish first. What the equipment that you need for 30 people in a room to try to get that full engagement experience for everyone is going to be very different than if you're in a large sanctuary with 100 people. So I would look at that first, and then, if anybody is interested, be happy to meet with you one-on-one and help you break down some of those things, because, with 30 people, you could almost get away with a good webcam. With 100, 150, you probably want at least a camera that you can control, one of the PTZ cameras. And you may also want multiple views, like Bruce had mentioned earlier, so that the remote people can see the faces of the people in the or on site in the actual live part of the service, if you will. So you've got that. Same thing for the audio portion of it. So that's my quick answer, Bruce. Look at what you're trying to accomplish, what you need, who needs to hear what, who needs to see what, and then step back and break it down into component parts.
Yes, thank you. So I think Brenda, I'll call you next, but I think one of the things is, I think it seems so daunting. I actually think that you can do a lot of what most of us really need to do without a huge amount of investment. I think if we get over it's a huge, big technical thing, which it is, I think you can also begin to think about this in a much smaller scale that isn't going to cost a lot. My question is always about staffing. I think a lot of pastors have found themselves now the IT department, and that is not what you were trained for, and certainly not what you were called to do. Or you're burning out your volunteers. That's the other piece that I've been hearing a lot about, is the person who turned into the techie in your congregation or your community is now like, I'm not worshiping anymore. This is now just me coming to work. And so finding that for me is one of the bigger concerns, is how do you run it now that this is long term, like this isn't a month, this isn't 2 months, this is it. Thinking a little more strategically about that. But I would say, I think most as we've heard and learned in our congregation and other settings, you have the sound capability generally in your congregation already. It's the video part that's going to be is a little bit more difficult. But again, I don't think it has to be as big. Brenda, let's go to you and then Scott. Oh,
Margaret, my congregation is about half the size of yours at this point, and we have no budget at this point for dealing with tech stuff, and I am, as the interim pastor, the tech guru, which I am completely unqualified for. However, a month ago, I was very, very concerned as we were getting ready to come back in person. And we have stumbled on a process where we now use 3 laptops, all personal laptops that we just drag into the sanctuary. One is focused on sound. One just simply is turned to face whoever happens to be leading worship at the moment, and one broadcasts the bulletin. And we've been able to do that fairly well on Zoom. Our sound is still a problem. We need somebody who understands more about sound than I do to help, but we're getting better at it. The part that I've enjoyed the most has been our fellowship after service, because we have simply taken one of our laptops and walked it out of the sanctuary in the processional to the gathering room and plugged it into a screen where people can then come up, and we are now able to get just about everybody who's there in person to come up and talk to the people at home during our fellowship time. And that is giving our Zoom resistant members a chance to actually experience something that is positive in all of this. So we don't have we're not settled, but we are on the way.
Great. That's awesome. Brenda, where are you again?
I am interim pastor in the Chicagoland area of UCC churches right now in Homewood, Illinois.
Great. All right. Well, thank you. That's very helpful. I mean, I think that is very common right now as folks are just trying to figure it out. I hope that the grace extended to everybody by your communities during all this continues. I've heard that is shortening sometimes, but I hope that continue as you all are figuring this out. All right, Scott, go for it.
Good morning. I'm Scott Clark. I'm pastor at First Presbyterian Church San Anselmo, which is on the north side of the bay, on which Bruce is on the south side in Marin County. And we are proudly follow the Bruce Reyes-Chow model. So there'll be a lot of similarities in what I described because they're things that I learned and copied from here. So we launched and added an in-person experience to our Zoom experience on April 25th. So we began that. So we're running a hybrid. We were on that. There were I had a death in the family that required me to be on the other side of the country, and the folks who were in charge decided they were going to go ahead with hybrid no matter what, even if I wasn't there. So I actually preached one of the first my first hybrid service from Florida on the big screen while the congregation and the worship leader were gathered there. I find hybrid to be so much more difficult than Zoom. And I've thought about this a lot. In Zoom, we just had to do it. And the direction was go in your house and shut the door and figure out Zoom. And everybody was at home. And I was fortunate, we've got a really committed Zoom team that is now burnt out and is not doing the in-person technology. None of the 4 of us are doing that. So we've got other folks who've come in for that. We have about 120 people in worship, which is up a little bit from pre-pandemic days. We implemented hybrid. I think the folks who were eager to get back in person were surprised that not many people came. So our 120 splits out to 30 people in person and 90 people on Zoom. Of those 90 people, my estimate is that 70 folks are folks who were coming to church before, so kind of local folks. And then the people that we've added fall largely into people who are family members of of our church members. So we have adults who grew up in the church who can now come back and are attending every week. My family, my mom worships with us, and then church members who've moved away. But we have 20 folks. And so there are a number of folks who are very invested in continuing worship and keeping those folks as a part and kind of figuring out what that membership looks like, or participation. It won't be PCUSA membership categories, which I'm not fond of anyway. We have 3 cameras. So we really basically run the service though with just the one. We have one camera up in the balcony. We've followed stuff that had been covered in the seminars, and we looked for existing equipment first, even if it wasn't the most current, but to try it out and then decide what to buy. We're still using most of it. I wish I could tell you the specifics of what it was, but I'm not sure what the camera is. I think we did buy a new camera. So it zooms in on the chancel, and then we've got another camera that faces the congregation, so you can get a congregational view. And then we've got one in the narthex, and the idea is that people can talk to it, but that hasn't really functioned. So I kind of wonder why it's there, but it was somebody's idea. So I'm letting them try and figure it out and get it working in the way that they envisioned. So our trouble though has been sound. So we've done it step by step and kind of said that. And I talk about how hard it is to set so that we're setting expectations with the congregation. You know, we're doing what we can. Our big step to get all the speaking voices was to run everything through our existing soundboard. And that works out really well. So it comes in wirelessly through the soundboard. The soundboard is on a computer that's then wired out to Zoom. So it gives a really good signal. All of the stuff that I've learned in the workshops here. But we want to have the organ because it's a big part of our church culture. And we have not been able to figure out how to mic that. So because of restrictions on singing and everything, our singers are still in the Zoom space. It really is Zoom space with some folks gathered in person, and we're adding worship leaders in. But I've got a memorial service on Saturday, and the person who died chose big organ pieces, and it's a huge part of the service. We're going to use Zoom, but we're doing it as streaming. It's not going to be, we're not using the interactive capacities of that. But I have no idea. This week, the struggle after 2 months of not figuring this out, because I think we've reached the limit of our competency on this, is to try and get that mic'd so the organ sound can get out. But the struggle is we're miking through our sound system to get to Zoom, but we don't want it to come into the sanctuary. So we've got 3 different people working on it. If anybody has any ideas, I'd love to pick your brain on that. Benefits, they tried a screen before I was there and it didn't work. We now have a huge screen up and folks love it. We've been able to reduce the bulletin to just one order of worship, front and back, and I'm actually hopeful we might even be able to get rid of it. Folks are not opposed. It's not a church that would have thought they would use a screen, but they're doing that. Struggled to figure out communion and things like that. But anyway, the sound, we just reach things that we just don't know how to do. So I agree with Bruce on staffing. I was lucky to have a seminary student who knew AV stuff. So he's worked with us, but he's moving after next week. So we've got to do a job description. But I'm convinced that to run all that, we need somebody who knows the ins and outs of that. What it will cost to get somebody to do that for, 15 hours a week, whether we'll be able to find it, I think that'll be a big struggle.
Well, we're going to race you, apparently.
Well, we're far enough apart, Bruce, that maybe we're not drawn from the same pool.
Everybody from San Francisco. San Francisco's right in the middle of where we are is going to be applying, and I'm like, the weather's better here. So
yeah, I'll try and look in Sonoma and Napa then.
All right. Thank you, Scott. That's wonderful. Thoughts, questions for Scott? I know that what we did, Scott, for our organ, even in the midterm, like now, we've just set up a Yeti and it's picked it up really well. But unbeknownst to me, apparently we had organ mics. I don't even know those existed, but they just hung like choir mics because they've done organ concerts before at this congregation. So apparently that works, and we've tested it and it sounds great. I mean, it sounds enough for our organ people to be like, oh yeah, okay. So again,
I've thought of running it through a separate computer too.
Yeah,
yeah.
That seems to have worked well enough for our organ people. So, I'm not an organ person, but our organ people seem to be okay. Henry, you were going to say something, and then Jeff.
Yeah, real quickly, separate computer will probably create a problem because you don't want more than one attendee from Zoom or one participant from Zoom sending audio from the same space. If you're running through your mixer, most mixers have monitor or aux outputs with separate controls for the monitor or the aux. If you have the organ mics, make sure they're connected to your mixer. If you don't, just put a one or two microphones out to pick up the organ and use the aux outputs to send the audio to Zoom via the auxes and not through your main output. That way you can control one mix for your PA that's being amplified on site, and then have a separate mix for what's going into Zoom. So you can add all of your ambient microphones for congregational, response, your microphones for organ or any other instruments that are not running through a microphone already, and you can mix those separately.
Yep. Awesome.
Henry,
Thank you.
so much. I think I understood enough that I
was
can
going to
explain
say,
it.
there's some people, I can see some people going,
somebody who can. So I really appreciate that.
But I think the takeaway is that most of us already have the things around sound. Surprisingly enough, you probably have all you need in your sanctuary already. And unfortunately, Radio Shack is closed now for all the adapters. But I think that's the part of the piece is just somebody who the way I've talked about it. Get somebody who understands signal flow, and then they'll be able to get it into the right ports at the right time in the right places. But yeah, you run it all into it, and that has been great. We have one person that's super intense about that at our church. I love it. So that's good. Jeff, let's go to you.
Hi, Jeff Spencer, Senior Pastor at Niles Discovery Church, United Church of Christ, and Christian Church Disciples of Christ in Fremont, California, across the bay from Bruce. And we're not at hybrid yet, but we are planning to get there. I just put a link in the chat that has an article that we sent to the church about how we're going to move to hybrid. The first thing that we're doing is interviewing everybody in the church to find out what our vaccine rate is. And it turns out we were thinking 80% would be a high bar and would give us some time. It's looking like we're like 90%. The only people that aren't vaccinated are under 12. And so we're getting pushed in a little faster to hybrid than I think we're ready, because we haven't figured out the tech stuff yet. And we haven't started doing those dry runs that Bruce is planning. We also have a huge number of people who've said they want to take advantage of the in-person option when we add it. And like more than come on Easter. So hopefully they won't all come at one time. And we also are planning to do require distancing when we start it. And so we'll have a very limited capacity in the sanctuary. And so one of the other things we need to figure out is sign up and what we do. How do we make sure that only a certain number of people sign up, and then, make sure that people aren't signing up. We're doing it 1 week at a time so that somebody doesn't take a seat and then not show up down the pike, et cetera, et cetera. So that's, the whole bunch of extra work, and it should be getting easier, and it's getting harder.
Yep.
But
thank you. Yep.
But the whole issue of the organ sound and ambient sound, that's a question. How are we going to do music is a question. And a big thing for us actually is how we're going to do prayers. When we, before COVID, we would be a small enough community that people could just pray out loud, and people wouldn't necessarily understand everything, but enough to know, okay, that person's praying for something, and we could respond together, oh God, hear our prayer. When we went to Zoom only, we just asked people to post their prayers in the chat, and then we had a person who would be the voice of the congregation reading those out, and then everybody in their home was invited to respond, oh God, hear our prayer. When we go to hybrid, the folk on Zoom will be able to continue to post their prayer requests in the chat, and the folk in the sanctuary won't. And so what do we do about that? And we are thinking everything from 3x5 cards that people write on and get tossed in a basket at some point, to having a cell phone that is dedicated to text messaging for prayer requests, to receive prayer requests, and then the person with that text phone will be the person that has a microphone to get it into the sound system, because just having people saying them out loud in the sanctuary isn't going to get picked up by a microphone, and therefore the people in Zoom will hear nothing. And because we want that whole there aren't two classes of worshipers thing, yeah. So we still haven't figured it out, but we've got those sorts of ideas going around.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. I know for some of you all in other parts of the country, you've had to deal with this already. And some of the things that Jeff brought up at the beginning, California, we've been pretty strict, and now we're starting to have to figure out the registration and any kind of, we're planning on using Planning Center is kind of what we're going to be using. We also are contemplating we may not do it. Like, we're in this really weird space, right? That I don't know. It's somebody, I was in a meeting the other day with another colleague, and they're like, it feels like the train is leaving. And I'm like, oh, the train is left in California. I mean, it is left. And we're now starting to get the pressures from outside. Why aren't we speeding up? So June 15th in California, all your California colleagues, just know we're going to be freaking out a little bit, depending on what is officially done. So we'll have to figure out. Thank you, Jeff. Oh, keep going. Yeah, do you want to add?
Just one more thing that occurs to me. The place of pushback that I'm noticing the most in my church is we suddenly need more volunteers.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And because we still need 2 Zoom ushers, we still need a Zoom greeter, and we're going to need, we don't know what to call them, grushers maybe, in the sanctuary, because we need people to help do attendance and to take seats. And because we're a disciples church, we do communion every week. And so we're coming up with plans for that. And the people, the leaders that sign up volunteers are saying, well, that's not our job. And the group, yeah. And so I'm thinking of saying, well, if we don't have the volunteers, we can't do it. We'll just stick with Zoom.
Yeah. Marty, and then I want to call on one other person. Go ahead, Marty. Go for it.
Marty Susie, Savannah, Georgia, PCUSA Church. We I just had a couple thoughts to help with some of the questions. So we use a Sign Up Genius for folks to register for worship. So we send our letter out to the congregation on Friday. It has the worship link, and then it has sign up if you're going to attend in person, so they can sign up. So then we cap it at so many. So if all the spaces are full, then they can't come in person. So that's one helpful thing for signups. And then we are doing hybrid. So we do have people coming in person now. We have our in-person usher, who we have deacons. I don't know if all churches have deacons, probably not. But that person is the greeter. And so they make sure that everyone that comes in signs in. So, they put their name and all the names of the people were in there. So we know exactly for tracking how many persons physically were there, plus the worship leaders on that. And then for communion, we're doing those little tiny, we call them little snack pack communions. So we have those laid out on Communion Sunday. They come in, they grab their little cup and they sign in, and they go to their little space that are spaced out in the sanctuary. And then the folks at home, grab whatever makes them happy at home, and so we have them on a projection screen that we used to use for Sunday school for a movie theater. So we have a big screen that we project the folks at home that are on Zoom, so that everybody sees everybody. And we use the pastor's cell phone on a selfie stick to take the picture of the congregation. so that it's on the little screen so everybody doesn't feel like they're missing. Because sometimes I get greeters that'll get up there and say, oh, it's great to see such a big crowd. It's like 22 people. It is not a big crowd. Quit making it like it's all that, and it's not. It makes people feel like they're missing something. That's all I got.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Marty. That's awesome. I'm just imagine. Can you, like most of our churches, if you just remind them, can you imagine a year and a half ago to tell them that this is what we'd be doing? They would be freaking. You would. Some of us have been risking our jobs, right? There was no way I'm going to be walking around with the selfie stick in the middle of worship with my cell phone on. That's not happening. But now look at us. All right, I want to invite a friend and colleague Sarah Stone-Cipher Boylan to talk a little bit. Sarah, if you could introduce yourself and then tell us a little about what you're doing. And then one of the things that we are hearing and we're expecting is that you're not going to get the attendance that everybody thinks you're going to get. That folks, and we have been told that by some of our older folks, that they will come once a month, but it's great rolling out of bed, getting online, but they want to be able to come every once in a while. So we're expecting low attendance. I'm just building that up for everyone. But Sarah, it works. Well, tell us what you do, Sarah, and why, and a little bit about what you're seeing.
Hey, my name is Sarah Stone-Cipher Boylan. I'm Episcopalian and I'm based in Northern Virginia. Now I'm based in Northern Virginia. I'll get into that in a second. And I am a digital ministry and digital formation consultant for many different denominations and many different types of projects. Before I moved into consulting, I was a digital missioner at Virginia Theological Seminary, which is an Episcopal seminary located in Northern Virginia. And so I've become cautiously aware because now I've been my spouse is an Episcopal priest, and both of his congregations that he's served in recently have done the hybrid reopening. So my husband's congregation in Louisiana a year ago was able to reopen. So this is where it's always helpful for context. So they were able to gather in person a year ago. And so they had a maximum of about 50. And it took a bishop's visit for them to reach capacity about 4 months in. So they never, ever hit that 50 limit, and unless it was a special event. And then at the congregation where he is now in Northern Virginia, so they have, again, about a 50-ish body limit in the sanctuary, and they still have not reached that limit. So they were able to be in the building after Easter, and so they still have not reached that in-person limit. I understand that signups are important, but it does sort of make me wonder, who are the signups for? Are the signups for the staff, or are the signups for other people to see how many other people are there, and so that they feel comfortable? And I think that Jeff spoke to this about the kids. I think that a lot of families are being more cautious because their children aren't vaccinated, and I think that wasn't, for somebody who does not have children, like that was an unexpected factor of where I was like, well, why isn't everybody here? Like, why aren't the families here? Well, because their children aren't vaccinated, in case you needed a dink to remind you about that. And so, like, I think that's a huge number. It's a huge population that I think, like, we just need to continue to be reminded about sort of why they're not showing up in person yet.
Great, thank you.
So yeah, so two different states, two different congregations, two different timelines.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I think that's a good reminder. I think folks, because this is the thing: if you've done your remote experience well, and I just choose to believe that everybody has done it as well as they can, and it's good. Folks are going to be like, oh, this is actually a legitimate way to experience worship. And again, not all the time, and so I think that's where our folks are going to fade in and out, and just be where I'm going to be at the beach. I'm hearing more and more people like, oh yeah, I was listening in the car. Like, I'm like, okay. I had somebody ask me if it was okay if they read the paper during worship, and I'm like, I don't care. Like, it's whatever, as long as you're there. But I think, thank you, Sarah. That is actually very, very helpful. So as you all are thinking about that, In California, the registration early on was for tracing, and that was one of the things that they required places to do. I don't think that is the case for us anymore. So that's why we're like, okay, what are we going to do with this information? So I think figuring out at June 15th, August 15th, when we actually start, what we're going to need to do. We are still going to be more conservative than the county. We've already kind of said that, in terms of masking, singing, spacing. And we're challenging our community to hold that through the end of the year, so we have a good 3 or 4 months of numbers before we decide we're going to open up even more. Now, that people may or may not be able to hang with that, but that's kind of where we're headed with it right now. So unfortunately, the National Choral Directors Society, if any of you have choir directors who are part of that, they put out a statement that folks can sing with unmasked inside. And I was like, why did you put that out? So, but it's all under this whole thing of everybody has to be vaccinated. And that's where we're having that question about it's just Scouts Honor, and, are we going to believe everybody? And we're not checking cards. So we've already decided we're not doing that. So anyway, that's kind of where I want to share one thing that we're going to do that I stole, liberated from another church. Is we're going to have these, we're calling them comfort cards. And we don't know really what we're going to land on it, but, and so you may have seen this floating around, that when you walk into our space, there's going to be stickers or clip-ons with different colors, that will help with people's awkwardness about how much they want to touch. And so, we have red for, I prefer not to be hugged kind of thing. Orange is going to be ask me. And then green is like hug away. But because as you all have been experienced, like California, again, we're now in this very early stages of going out and seeing people. The awkward, like, what do we do? Is super obvious. So we're going to do that. I saw that floating around. We're going to do stickers and then little name tag things. And so you can decide. And we have some of our folks like, can we always have those? Because I never want to be hugged. So I'm always going to wear the red one all the time. So anyway, that's one of the things that we are committed to make the space as unnecessarily awkward as possible. So there you go. All right, other one. Who else is doing hybrid that you're starting to move in or have thoughts or questions or want to lift up some things? Feedback at all? Anyone? No. Oh, go ahead, Gwen. Is this your first time with us?
Yes, it is.
Well, welcome.
Thank you. It's a fascinating conversation. My name is Gwen. I'm the minister at a Presbyterian church in Southern Ontario. And we were not involved in any kind of digital worship prior to COVID. And the first weekend out, I just took my laptop out and pressed video and started live stream. And at this point, I'm not a techie person, but I am the most techie in my congregation. So it's as good as it's. I use an iPhone 11 XR, and I got a little mic that plugs in the bottom of it. And I have somebody who looks after that. I started off with my iPad, and so then I had to figure out how to reverse print all of my hymns, because I do actually have my people sing in their homes. I'm a singer. I can't imagine worship without it. This past week, the guy that does my video and his partner, who's my church musician, were away. And I actually learned that even on my iPhone, I can just reverse the camera now. So that's where I am. And I'm trying to figure out now, I think there's funding available through one of our local organizations to get what we need. And I don't know, do I get a camera? We already had sound in our sanctuary, and we have projection in our sanctuary. And I'm at a loss as to what do I look to, who can tell me, how can we are committed to continuing live stream worship after COVID is all over. We're not going to go back to not having it. So that's me, and that's where I am.
Great, thank you. A more common story than not, I think, for many, many churches across denominations. We're mostly small congregations, pastors have found themselves again being the IT person and the most technological person in the space, or finding people, and then now they're getting tired too. So thank you, Gwen. I think the best place for getting all this is into the Zoom group and Facebook, and just asking questions, and folks are super helpful there. But a lot of commonalities, a lot of people. Scott.
So one of the frustrating byproducts for me of hybrid is, after having 4 weeks of hybrid worship that I feel is hard work and that is rocky, but grace abounds, as our slides say, is there is a group of folks who now want hybrid for everything. So they want every meeting to be hybrid. They don't want it to be Zoom anymore, and they don't want to go back to completely in person. So imagine, and so the session member hit that with me after we had adjourned session in our April meeting, said, "Oh, by the way, I meant to mention this," and I just hemmed and hawed. And then so I put it on the next session meeting and had the clarity for Bruce was saying this: I'm not doing this. What I did for Zoom, I can't do. So you need to decide if this is something you really want to do, and then who will do it. But there's a lot of frustration now because folks want to be able to do things from in the car. They do. If they've just gotten home from work, they're much likely to attend session meeting if they can just hop on Zoom, which for me, that means let's just do our meetings on Zoom. That makes sense. It saves nobody's getting in a car and polluting the world. But anyway, the demand for hybrid in other settings has surprised me, and particularly how pointed people are. And there's just an assumption that because we're committing in worship to a hybrid experience, that the rest of our life will follow that. And they'll cite school experiences, and I'm like, I don't hear from our teachers that it's so good in the school setting. But anyway, just to flag that, it's just
great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Scott. I mean, so that's really helpful. I would create your boundaries early about what you can do, and if you're going to staff this, I mean, we're thinking about hiring a specific Zoom coordinator, which seems ridiculous, but whether that crosses other things that we need or not, that's kind of where we are. But so what we're doing, Scott, and fortunately got ahead of this early, is that I actually said the only thing we're doing on hybrid is our worship experience, and that everything else will either be in person, remote, and if there makes sense for hybrid things, it'll be hybrid. But we've just kind of said we don't have the capacity to build a smart classroom yet. We're thinking about having one room that's going to be a smart room that we can do everything there. But I hear you. I don't know if anybody else facing that push from your people at all, because I think hybrid meetings, most of us can't pull them off. I mean, if you're Henry, and Henry's been doing this, that's his profession, could create a space, but most of us can't pull off a really good hybrid meeting, I think. But Henry, quick thoughts about that as folks, who don't have capacity, or, what to do or how to respond to folks around that?
So real quickly, what we did, because we have ESL classes and we've already moved those to hybrid, we're using one of our ESL classes for, say, our deacons meeting this month is a hybrid meeting, because several people didn't want to come on site now that we're maskless and everything else. It takes a lot less to do one of those hybrid classrooms than you would think. It's basically, you need a computer or a laptop, you need a webcam, you need some sort of a speakerphone that can pick up more than the microphone on your laptop does. Beyond that, it's we just have a TV mounted on the wall. So when you break it down into the component parts, it's not really as daunting as it may seem. Once you put it all together, it looks pretty impressive. But the component parts are pretty simple.
Yeah. So I'm hearing from our people who do this, like that dedicated room is probably your easiest, best thing to do. I'm seeing Marty say yes, Sarah say yes, Henry put that in the chat as well. Henry, how many people, like for your deacons meeting, just curious, how many people are remote?
About a third is what I understand. And I think that group was probably about 25 to 30 total. So maybe 10 people remote and about 15, 20 on site in the room.
Great. Anybody else had some experience or around the creating a space where you could do hybrid meetings? I'm not sure if this is what you want to hear, Scott, that it's not as hard as possible, but there you go. But are there other folks that have been playing with it?
We have somebody prototyping it, so we'll
Okay.
see. I actually had somebody say I'll do it, and I was like, oh, okay. And people strongly opposed too.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Go ahead, Jeff.
One of the things I noticed, we have had 3 congregational meetings during shelter in place, and participation in discussion, which is vital for churches that are congregational polity, isn't happening when it's hybrid. And so I'm real concerned when it's on Zoom. I don't think hybrid is going to work in terms of equality of presence for a congregational meeting. And that's the one where I'm expecting to get the most high pushback, because they always follow a worship service. And so if people are worshiping hybrid, they will want the meeting to be hybrid. And I'm wondering how we can really keep the equality of people present in that meeting.
Right.
That's where I'm most anxious about hybrid. And I think that I'm going to be able to convince people that, like, when a ministry team is meeting, either meet on Zoom or meet in person, but don't try to do that hybrid. Yeah. And people will go, oh, okay.
Yeah, but check out the chat. There's a few folks. Eric in Arizona has said that their folks have loved community meetings. What I'm leaning towards, and what our presbytery, San Jose Presbytery, is doing, is they've asked all the committees, and we have. So I'm on one committee, preparation for ministry for Presbyterians. It's our people who are headed towards ordination and all that. We have 5 meetings a year, and we just decided 4 are going to be on Zoom and 1 will be in person. We, rather than try to do them as hybrid, we just decided we're just going to split them up. And, you know, it's good to be in person. Like, one is not better than the other, but all of one versus all of the other isn't what we want. So that's kind of what we do. Our session has actually decided we're going to continue to meet on Zoom. And we may go to that same model where we do 2 in person, but because we're thinking about bringing people on session who are not in our presbytery, in our geographic region, which is going to create some polity issues, I'm sure, for someone. But that's kind of what we're like, trying to actually integrate remote people into the life of the church. So we're going to play with that, because they will almost always have to be remote. So yeah, I don't know. It's going to be, that's an interesting question for folks. So so Henry puts in there around introverts and extroverts online and Zoom and all that. It's interesting, Jeff, when you bring up not as much interaction. I think that is totally true. But I was like, oh, we don't have as much kind of extra stuff. But at the same time, what's not being said that could be said, right? I mean, it's that both and of people are a lot more streamlined. At the same time, maybe they're not comfortable with. But I think that's something we got to keep balancing, right? That online in-person thing. All right, others. Anybody who hasn't talked yet, want to share with what you're doing? Any best practices, struggles, questions you might want to share with what's happening as you're moving into whatever is next for you all? Go ahead, Tumon. Yep.
Hi. I was like, am I talking? I'm Tijuana Gray. I'm pastor of Metropolitan Community Church of Topeka in Topeka, Kansas. And we were starting to figure out when and I love that you're all using the language, we're adding an in-person option, because that's what I'm trying to intentionally use, that language as well. And I had a plan, a timeline mapped out, and then we had an opportunity to do something that made the timeline get compressed. So we're like, well, let's try it. And I went into our sanctuary just to test out some things during worship, because I wasn't preaching and I wasn't participating in worship yesterday, allegedly. So it was like, it'll be a good time for me to go, and I can push buttons in sanctuary. Everybody will stay remote. And I tried to get one of my tech people to do, to just be ready to back up if I fail on my end. And it was like, she missed one thing and then got really hard on herself and melted down. So I was like, okay, we're not doing this right now. We're just gonna back up and wait. So yeah, I'm like, as I always do, I come and I take a lot of mental notes and just try to figure out, I'm a 3/4 time pastor, allegedly. So we try to trying to work out our timeline also has to work around when am I here, when am I not here, and I'm the tech person. So when can we figure this out outside of worship? When can everybody else get together? So
Yeah.
you said best practices. I was like, the best thing I say, slow down and don't try to figure it out during worship.
Yeah. Practice. I think that's good. And Tiwan, you got to do a reunion with your spouse, right? Finally?
I did. After what, 13 and a half months, we
oh my
said?
Goodness. Yay.
I don't even remember. From March of last year till May of this year. So yes, we saw each other, spent a week together, and I'm actually going to see her again tomorrow under not quite as happy circumstances, but we'll be together.
Oh, good. Glad you ran to make that. I just remember that we were all excited for you that you all got to be in the same geographic location. So good. Yeah, I think that's really helpful. As I've been working with our folks too, I keep reminding them that I'm a pastor first. And so trying to figure out how to tend to, because we have folks that are like, some of our liturgists are super nervous about being on Zoom liturgy, but not in person. And some of our tech people are like, they don't want to try it because they're afraid they could break the internet. And I almost like, you actually won't be able to break the internet as hard as you try. And if something goes wrong, our folks have been very generous. I mean, yesterday, my slides weren't advancing, which, if that doesn't work in a Zoom experience, it kind of sucks. So, but everybody was just fine. I just kind of carried on and all that. But, I think that I'm hoping grace still abounds. And I keep reminding folks, like, I happen to know some tech, but I'm not a tech. Like, that's not my thing. So, anyway, it is getting to the end of our time. Anybody want to throw in some last things if you haven't spoken yet? So grateful for you all. Anyone? No? All right. Going once, going twice. All right. So again, Phil, please go in and go into the Zoom group. And, if you have any questions there, make sure you do that. Henry is in there. I think Sarah's in there. I mean, there's lots of people in there that can offer a lot of information, but just kind of help you figure a lot of this stuff out. Again, I hope you all are doing well in leading, however you are leading these days. Joanne, I know you're in a new call, so I hope that's going okay. If you've been able to actually meet people yet, but that'd be, but congratulations on your shift to Portland. And anybody else is going transitions. I'm, hopefully, we're all doing okay. All right, everyone. Thanks much.
Thank you for creating this space for us.
Oh yeah, no problem. Love it. All right. We'll see you next month. All right. Bye.
Thank you.